Hi folks, Doc here. The time has come to address the silicone. That's that horribly boogered up engine that we laid hands on a little while back that had bird poop welds all over the rockers and the most silicone I think I've ever seen on an engine. Anyways, we ordered the required rebuild parts and we're just cleaning up all the gasket mating surfaces here. And then we're going to give the cylinder a light honing and start assembling. And with a little bit of luck, we'll get this sucker running today. So stick around and we'll show you what we're doing. Okay, so next step here is to get this thing honed out because there's a little bit of crud on the cylinder walls. I'll show you that in a minute. And I've taken my welding table and I've just bolted it right to the welding table so it doesn't move. That's a handy feature to have. And I've got a pan on the lift underneath it to catch excess honing oil that drools out. And we've got the hone set up on the drill there. And although the lighting is not great on this side of the shop, which I do need to do something about, you can see there's just a little bit of light crud on the cylinder walls, and basically all we're going to do is just polish that off. Alright, so we've been buzzing away at this thing, and it's actually looking pretty good. You can see just the faint semblance of a stain in there still. However, because this does not have a cast iron cylinder liner, we really don't want to overdo it. We don't want to wind up overboring it with the hone. So the surface looks good, the pattern looks pretty good, and those stains, according to my fingernail, are really nothing worth worrying about. If anything, the rings will polish them. And this, folks, is why when brake cleaner goes on sale, I buy several. I'm actually a little bit disappointed in this engine, to tell the truth. It dawned on me after we started cracking into it, basically once we got the hone out and I started looking at it and realizing that this one here does not have a cast iron cylinder liner. Many of the engine manufacturers have done this where it's just a raw aluminum bore. Briggs & Stratton called this particular system, for lack of a better term, the cool bore or something like that. I forget exactly, where it's just the aluminum, and that's very disappointing. This is one of those cases that kind of goes to prove that not all clones are created equal. Some of the clones do in fact have cast iron liners, the better ones do. Obviously this is not one of the better ones, so if you're shopping at a clone, this one was marked Power Cube, I believe. We'll check the shroud later as we reassemble it. So keep your eye out for those, because this is not something that I would knowingly and willingly spend a couple of $100 on brand new. If I'm going to be whipping out the wallet, I'm getting a cast iron liner. Fortunately, we don't have much into this so far. I bought the whole tractor for $100, and the rebuild parts, I'm just going to lean over behind Gary here. I've got this gasket set here, and you'll notice it's marked gasket. Handy, huh? Good thing, in case you couldn't tell. So I've got a complete gasket set here, and I've got a little baggie. We'll break out the parts later. That contains the push rods, the push rod guide plate, the rocker studs, the rocker lock nuts and adjuster nuts, and a pair of rockers. And these two, purchased separately, including shipping to my door, cost me $19 Canadian. I gave myself a $100 rebuild budget on this thing, and so far I've got $81 left. So yeah, when it all comes down to it, this engine isn't going to really owe us anything, so I don't feel too bad about it. But if I was, you know, whipping out the big bucks, I think I'd be a little ticked off to discover this. This rocker stud here was actually bent somehow, so we're going to replace the both of them. If one's bent, I don't trust the other one. And I've got the shop tablet here. Yeah, I'm not surprised. That's got a little bend to it too. And yeah, I've downloaded an assembly spec sheet off Mr. Internet here, which is handy as heck. And as you can see, we've got the torque spec for the rocker arm pivot bolt at 17 foot-pounds. So we've got the torque wrench ready and we've got the Loctite ready. And we're going to replace both of those and the guide plate. Gotta get some more. There we go. Yep, got it. Plate, plate, plate. Right. There you go. I'll finish that sentence in a sec. Halfway straight in there. And drive it home. Yeah, that's going now. Give it a hit. Beautiful. Okay, very. Okay, so the next step here is measuring the ring end gap. Now, we are actually reusing the piston rings that came with this thing because of the fact that once we got everything, we got the piston and the ring soaked in diesel, everything looked really, really good. I can think of no reason not to reuse them. So here's what we're going to do here. We're going to insert the piston ring in the bore. In this case, we're starting with the top ring. You should theoretically do this with all the rings, and use the piston to square it in the bore and just set it down just a little bit. And we're going to grab our feeler gauge here. Now, I've already looked up the specification on this one, and bring the tablet in here. Hold on a second. Okay, I've got a spec sheet here. See if that's showing up on the camera there. And the ring clearance, I'm looking at this sideways, eh? Ring gap top and second is 10 to 40 thou. I would consider 40 thou a little bit wide, but remember that you don't want the ring ends touching, because when the engine heats up, they'll expand, bind, and break. That's actually a pretty good guess right there. And that one there is 14 thou. So obviously 14 thou is within spec, because it was 10 to 40, 14, 15. Try the 15 here. That's a pretty good fit. So we're at about 15 thou on the ring end gap for the top ring, and we're going to call that good. And then we'll check the other ones and proceed with the assembly. Gary is proceeding with the installation of the piston rings. Having checked all the clearances, the ring end gaps are good. I'm just going to take a quick moment here just to show you a piston ring, and if you find that the ring gap is not sufficient, you can actually clamp it in a vise and use a fine file, filing inwards, never outwards, because you don't want to chip the outside surface, filing inwards just a little bit at a time, and keep rechecking. I did have to do this on a ring recently, and it's actually not that hard of a job to do. So Gary is currently installing the oil ring expander.
Yeah, if it wants to go in. There we go. Or not.
And of course, remember to stagger your ring end gaps so that not all the gaps are in the same place on the piston. We've already set the ring compressor on the piston. And a little bit of gear oil on the cylinder walls to help protect everything as we go in. Make sure you've got the mark oriented the right way around.
Mark always goes down on this one.
Yep. I'm going to try and roll the crank into position as you're doing that. You may have to use the butt end of the hammer. Use the wooden end, folks.
That's all in.
Keep going. There you go. Okay, beautiful. We're putting the rod end cap on now. Loctite on the bolts, of course. Tightening to 120 inch-pounds, which is 10 foot-pounds. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second here. Note the orientation of the rod end cap with the dipper facing down. If you have it facing up, things are going to break fast. There you go. That's one, very nice. Good. Okay, so crankshaft and counterbalance shaft are in. Gary's digging the tappets out of the bag there. And he's going to put the tappets in and slap the camshaft in. Alright.
Probably should got the back one in first.
Inner detail.
There we go.
Alright, cool. And now the camshaft.
Yeah, you're in.
And as you can see here, just give this a crank. All right, so you've got your timing dots aligned here. And
Give me a second.
we'll rotate that around.
There we go.
And timing marks aligned. There. Fabulous.
Brakes in it.
Okay, so we're applying just a very, very light coat of gasket sealant to the cover. There's a couple of nicks and scratches and imperfections from where people have pried it open with frickin' bucket loaders or something. Anyways, there's a little bit of surface damage. We cleaned it up a bit. We're just going to put a light coat of gasket sealant on there just to help make sure things do what we want them to do.
There we go. Now, gasket, come in. There we go. Slide you on. That stuff stinks.
Yep. Just going to mesh the governor gear. Okay, tap.
Yeah, watch your fingers.
Okay. Bolts. Okay, just hold that thought for a second. You've got the gasket?
Yes. Way ahead of you.
Alright, so cylinder head time. Yep.
Doo-doo-doo.
Got all that cleaned up. Good to go.
Ish. All the silicone will just burn off though.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, you're all good.
Put Loctite on the bolts.
Nope.
Are we going to go through this with every part of the assembly sequence where you start putting it together and I say, did you put Loctite on the bolts? And you say, nope.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, well, at least you're honest. We're going to 17 foot-pounds on this one again, which is 204 inch-pounds.
Actually surprised it's that low.
4. Yeah, you'd think it would be a little bit more on the head, eh? But apparently not. And you're going to tighten them down in a crisscross pattern, of course. Beauty. Alright, we can start putting the valve train together. A couple of ways to possibly do this. One of them is to stick a pencil in the hole or use one of these fancy piston position gauges that I have here, which is really cool. It's a spring-loaded deal with a brass tip on it, so it doesn't mar the piston. And we're just going to roll this thing to top dead center on the compression stroke so that we can assemble the valve train and set the valve lash. And now that there's something in the spark plug hole, it's a little harder for Gary to turn. That's okay. Just watch the gauge.
There we go.
Yep. And both tappets are released, so that is top dead center on the compression stroke. You can screw this back in again later if we need to, but in the meantime, it's time to start assembling the rocker. I've looked up the lash specs for this engine, and it's 0.15 millimeters on the intake and 0.20 on the exhaust. I could convert that, but no need to because my feeler gauges have metric on them as well. So yeah, you want to make sure that's sitting on the push rod, which it is. You're good. And just leave that kind of like the way you have it right now. Now, when I'm setting the valve lash on Briggs overhead valve engines, I'm just going to do the same thing that I do on those things, which is roll the piston a little bit past top dead center of the compression stroke to make sure that you're not sitting on the compression release when you go to set the valve lash. Because that can give you a false reading. You can set the lash with it sitting on the compression release, and the next thing you know, your valve latch still is not set correctly right now. So you've got the 15 thou feeler gauge.
Yep.
Or 15 thou, I'm sorry, 0.15 millimeter. Just get that snugged in with your fingers.
Really? Stay.
Okay, let me feel. Should be just a easy fit. Now you've got it a little tight there. There we go. Like, I'm sure it's within spec, but you don't need to horse it in. So while it's in there, just going to tighten down the jam nut. Pull that out. And we've got a 10 mil wrench and a 14 mil wrench here. So what you want to do is you want to hold the adjuster nut and then tighten the jam nut. Like so. Just give it one more snug for good measure. And then just to make sure that you haven't boned it, grab your gauge again, which I can't see in this lighting. There we go. And that's pretty good. Okay. Oh.
Yep, they're working.
Look at that, a functioning Valvetrain. Just snug it, don't kill it on.
Okay.
Find the keyway, get the flywheel on there. Just a quick note, be careful not to drop the flywheel. If you drop the flywheel, it is garbage. Alright, so cooling fan. It's probably easier if you line up the starter cup first.
Probably.
Yep. Is there an index hole? It feels like there's an index hole. There you go. Beauty. I'll just hold that there if you want to start the nut. And we've got the torque wrench dialed up to 83 foot-pounds, because that's the specification for this engine. I know I'm going back and forth between metric and imperial, but it just depends on whether the section of which part of which manual I was looking in. And most of my tools are bisexual. They'll go either way. Okay, so turns out the little flywheel holder tool I have isn't going to work particularly well on this because it doesn't have a ring gear with teeth on it for a starter. And of course this is a pull start only engine. So we're going to do the old rope trick here. So we're just going to take some rope and drop the piston so we know it's off top dead center. And I've just got some paracord here, and I'm just going to feed a bunch of it into the cylinder. And what you do is you jam the piston up against this, and that will keep the assembly from rotating while you're trying to tighten the flywheel nut, and it will not hurt the engine internals. In fact, some shop manuals actually tell you to do this. Okay, we should be good there. Piston's up against the rope. I'm going to try and hold the engine, and you know, I just went in the wrong direction with this piston. Hold on a second. My bad. Go ahead. Yeah, don't step on that. Beauty. Alright. Pull that off. Do this.
How much rope is in there?
Pull the rabbit out of your hat. Okay. Installing the Magneto. Now, specification on Briggs & Stratton engines is about 10 thou. A standard business card will mic out to about 10 thou. It's close enough. I usually use a business card just to set my Magneto air gaps. I just find it a bit of a pain in the butt with a feeler gauge because you've got a curved surface here and a magnet and a metal feeler gauge, and it's a pain in the rear end. Now on the Honda, the specification is actually 16 thou. We're going to not worry about that too much because as long as nothing is striking, it's not going to hurt anything with a bit of a tighter gap. Now on some older, non-electronic Magneto systems, Tecumseh comes to mind. There was definitely a Tecumseh I was working on where the gap was a lot more critical because it would actually affect timing. In this particular case, it's not going to. So we're going to... Always!
Murphy's
Frickin'
Law!
always. So we're going to set the business card in there and put the Magneto on. And he's just going to basically put in the bolts loosely. Just finger tight, so to speak. Once he finds the hole, we're not going there. Now I do not have this over the magnet just yet, because the magnet makes your life miserable until you're ready for it. So we're just going to roll it in over the magnet, loosen the bolts for a second, and just let the magnet suck it in. Okay, you should be able to feel the magnetic pull there. There it is. Okay, so snug that down again. Just give it a wee snug. Okay. Yep. And then we're just going to roll the card out. It's going to kill the card, which it often does, no big deal. And then we're just going to take the flywheel through a complete rotation, make sure nothing is striking, which is not. That looks great. So we're going to tighten those things down and continue on. We are so close to a test fire now, this is getting exciting. Okay, so time to start putting the carb system together. Obviously we've got a bunch of gaskets and pieces and parts and stuff to go on. I just want to point this out for when you're assembling stuff. You've got all kinds of gaskets and this plastic isolator block and stuff like that. So the plain gasket goes on first. And the holes are not centered, so if you have it upside down, the gasket won't line up properly, and that's no damn good. Now, if you look at this little isolator, and I'll bring it close to the camera, you can see an air vent channel here, and it's plain on this side, and these little hook things. And the spark plug wire gets hooked into these hook things, so you know that goes on top. And this air vent channel goes towards the carburetor. So that goes on next. Now, this gasket that follows has a pinhole right here. That has to line up with the vent. If you get that around backwards, things are not going to go in your favor. So that goes on next. Now when you get to the carburetor, you know, obviously choke side out, and you'll see that pinhole for that vent, and there it is right there. So we're going to get that all set to go and get the last remaining remnants of the old crappy fuel line off. We're going to have to put new fuel line on, and we're going to have to get these governor linkages on there too. So I'm just going to temporarily set that there for the moment and cut this zip tie that I used to keep our governor linkages from leaving town, because I didn't want them getting lost, misaligned, misappropriated, mislaid, misdemeanor. So we've got a spring and a rod here. And these are going to go here. And that spring there is a freaking mystery to me. I don't remember right now. We'll figure that out in a minute. Anyways, when it comes to the throttle linkage here, just bring this out for a second. There's the hole for the rod and the hole for the spring. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. Rod goes in the hole. And the spring, which would be easier if Gary wasn't playing with the other end of this assembly. Spring in the hole. And we can pop that on like so. Right? So the carb's sitting on the studs. And it's just going to sit and stay till we go to put the air box on, because the air intake box kind of retains it. Right. Governor control plate and spring. What else?
Shroud.
Yeah, can't believe how stiff that throttle mechanism is. I actually wouldn't mind backing that off just a touch, just to make it easier for us to manipulate when it comes time. 12. No. Is that a 10? I didn't think it was a 10. Yes, it is. That's a little better. Okay, I believe all that's correct. So at this point, we can go ahead and bolt the shroud on, bolt the airbox on, bolt the fuel tank on, run a new piece of line, because the other one sucked and I cut it off, and throw some oil in this pig and fire it up. Okay, so I managed to scoop a factory stock muffler for now to save our ears off one of my other engines that I'm going to be working on. An actual brand name Honda GX390 that came off a generator. You all might recall this little bit of ugliness that came with this engine. It went to a stack thing, and yeah, that's totally unacceptable. So we're bolting on this factory stock muffler. We just finished putting the tank on, and after he finishes with that, it's airbox, spark plug, oil, fuel, and let it rip, Tater Chip. Alright, so we have gotten just about everything we can think of to get. Muffler on, fuel tank on, fuel line. What's that? That's a vent fitting. Now, the PCV hose was missing. That goes from the rocker cover to the airbox. I'm going to have to scout through all my parts and find a length of hose of an appropriate diameter. I don't have that at hand at the moment. Easy, killer, you're drooling. However, I'm not too worried about that at the moment. What I am kind of concerned about is just seeing if this bugger is going to fire. So Gary is putting in the required 1.1 quarts of oil. Well, he's pouring in 1 quart of oil. The other 100 milliliters of oil is winding up all over the workbench. So yeah, just firing a squirt out of this bottle here. I'm going to dig up the jerry can, and then we're going to clear the bench,
bolt it down,
clamp the engine down, and see what the hell happens. Okay, folks, we've hit what we're going to go ahead and call the moment of truth here. I'm just going to flip the garage door open. And ignition switch is on, fuel's on, choke's on, throttle up. We filled it with oil, we filled it with fuel. So I'm just going to actually shut off the ignition for a second, just pull it through a couple of rotations. Hopefully draw some fuel around, distribute a little oil. Alright, so that's all on, that's all on.
Nice.
1 pull, ladies and gentlemen. Beautiful. Excellent. Well done, dude.
Thank you.
Nice. Alrighty. So the silly clone lives. $19 worth of parts shipped to my door. Oh, we are horribly backlit. Hold on. That's a little bit better. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this little extravaganza in rebuilding a clone on the cheap. That was fun. I had fun doing it with you. Mostly I had a hard time just watching you and trying not to do anything because they grow up so fast. Anyways, I'm sure this engine is going to appear. That shaft came out great. On a project sometime soon, I'm sure. We haven't decided what we're going to use it for, which is why we did not remove the governor. We can always do that later. For now, I left it in because if it's going to wind up on a tractor or something like that, it's best left governed. Anyways, thank you for tuning in, watching, sharing, subscribing, all that jazz. And until next time, take care of yourself.
Holy crap, 1 pull.
One frickin' awesome, eh? Fabu, you couldn't have even scripted.